Today is the last day. We're going to talk about conclusions, the conclusions of your essays, the conclusions of the class, the conclusions of anthropology, the conclusion of the textbook. Read the whole darn thing. Conclusions. Earlier, I believe I told you that writing your first paragraph is the most difficult thing. You should probably save it until the end of your essay to write it. But that was slightly a lie. The conclusion, the last paragraph, is actually the hardest thing to write. In fact, I will later claim that it is impossible to write a good conclusion. I'll tell you why in a second. In the old days, the Hartford writing handbook, we used to have this thing that we passed out to people that told them how to write their essays or their papers, or what was a good paper or an essay. I think the Hartford writing handbook may have been written sometime around 1973 or so. It used to be still in circulation, but the last time I clicked on the website, it seems to have gone away. Probably better. The paper should end with a sense of completeness, authority, perhaps even of climax. The conclusion should gather the paper's accomplishments and discoveries into a coherent reformulation of the problem that began the paper. What do you think? Climax. Yeah, no, I remember the last class when we were talking about phallic masturbatory duels and you all said these didn't happen. Well, indeed, in the 1970s, they probably did. There you go. Completeness, authority, perhaps even climax. All right, so the myth of completion is something, it's a title of a chapter that in a book I sometimes assign to people about the idea that things got completed, that the Spanish conquest completely dominated everybody, the myth of completion. So completeness, authority, and climax seem to refer to something, some other world, perhaps in the old days, the days of the 1970s, when guys were writing things and this was it. This was the last paragraph and it was going to do something big. And so the reason I believe that in today's world, it's impossible to write a great conclusion, those kinds of conclusions, is that if you've written such a thing, such a great, awesome conclusion, then you probably should just take that conclusion and move it to the beginning of your essay. And the reason for that is the reason you all know, that people are going to click away from whatever it is they're reading, or they're going to zoom ahead. And so you might as well get their attention at the beginning. I mean, certainly, maybe some days people can sit down and write this thing. So you sort of have to do something different in the conclusion. You know, I mean, I guess you could do something completely different, like go off in a different direction and hint at something that could be done just to throw a surprise curveball at the writer, I mean the reader, which is, you know, I mean, I think that's probably a legitimate tactic in the days that nobody reads anything to the end of things. You just throw something else in there. But more realistically, for when you're writing an essay for someone who is supposed to read it, you know, I mean, I think that we need to be realistic about what we can do. So, you know, here's one approach, is simply to indeed go back to the beginning and kind of summarize what you tried to do, what the evidence tells you, where that journey took you to get to the end of the essay. And there's a couple of other things that you could do. We're writing short essays, so we don't have a lot of time to do that. So you could sort of hint at what might be done if I had more time, if I were to do research, if I were to turn this into a larger project, then I would, you know, expand on this, or there's a lot of opportunity here or there. So that's one approach. Something else you could speculate on is, you know, if I take these ideas outside of this essay that I had to write because it's the end of the semester and my professor told me to, what would I do? Why does this matter to me beyond what I'm actually doing in the writing of things? So these are, again, in the old days, we would have looked for that amazing conclusion to the essay. In the new days, I look for something that, that you're still taking things, you're summing up what you did, but you're trying to work on them and take them in a different direction. And you have some reason that this matters to you and not just to me. I decided to take a look at the conclusion of the concluding paragraph of our textbook, which is on page 421, the very last thing they have to say. It starts with a quote from the director of the American Anthropological Association, international, diverse, blah, blah, blah. And then it has this sentence, which I thought was pretty good. Anthropology is the only contemporary discipline that approaches human questions from historical, biological, linguistic, and cultural perspectives. And then there's, another kind of funny how anthropology has changed. Anthropology has an important role to play in solving human problems. So I thought this sentence was a pretty good, or at least parts of the ideas of the conclusion were pretty good here, especially this sentence, I thought, and solving human problems. We all like to solve human problems. So then I decided, well, what happened at the very beginning of the book? Let's go back to chapter 1. And in this sense, I did want to skip, although in your essays, I gave you a quote from the preface. Nobody reads prefaces. So what would you read in chapter 1 on page 2? And it's kind of I have to say, it's kind of a blah paragraph. The question of what makes human beings different from all other species is central to anthropology. And then it talks about primates in 5 to 7 million years, which is fine, sure. We want to know how humans have become different from other species, but it's like, what? No, nobody cares anymore. This sentence probably would have, and that whole paragraph probably would have been a good opener. That, this is the only academic discipline today that takes things from historical, biological, linguistic, and cultural perspectives. They could then specify that in this textbook, in this class, they were going to be mostly doing the cultural and the linguistic part of things, and then talk about the big human problems that we may need to solve by doing it this way. So I decided to rewrite that sentence a little bit. Now, it's not even going to be a sentence because this is the PowerPoint presentation of it. That anthropology is the only academic discipline that combines the evolution and the biology side of things. So here at Hartford, you can go in next semester and take biological anthropology, learn about human evolution and the ideas of what makes us human from a biological perspective. Combines that with the archaeology. We did a little bit of that even in this class. The material culture, the historical analysis. You can take next semester the political archaeology, for example, or ancient civilizations, historical archaeology classes. So combining both the biology and evolution, the history and the archaeology, with what we've been doing in this class, the culture and the language stuff. And I was honestly trying to think, is there any other academic discipline that actually tries to combine these things, or tries to at least every so often talk across these kinds of issues? And I honestly couldn't come up with one, and I'm not trying to plug anthropology too much. I think we are. I think we're the only one that still tries every so often to take all of these things into account. And we've always made it our mission to really talk to real people and get a sense of what they think of the world, their lived experiences in all different parts of the world, not just in one part of the world, or not simply in the, what we might call the West, the global North, but not just in the global South or the non-West either. So, I mean, again, I think that I don't want like I said, I've tried to think about if there's any other discipline. And certainly anthropology has made super amounts of mistakes about doing this wrong over the years and hasn't always been great about all kinds of things. But in terms of where we are now, I struggle to imagine somebody else who's trying to combine these things combined with real fieldwork studies out there. Of course, the question is always, it's always, so what? So what if we're the only academic discipline that does all those things? What difference does that make? So let's think about this for a second. When we look out at the human problems that we have, not just our own personal problems, but the social, global problems, the human problems that we have, what is it that we most want to think about? What is it that we most want to solve over the next, how many more years are we going to be alive? You're going to be alive. You might have 70 or 80 years. Whew, that'd be good. What do you want to see changed over that time? Solved, worked on? A lot of things. What would you say one thing? Huh? Economic inequality. What do you think, Liz? Environmental. Sean.
I would say our political climate.
Political climate. Jalen. Racial injustice. Annie. You can now start repeating. Might come back to you. You might have to choose one. Aaron.
Maybe differences.
Health and healthcare. Gabe.
Food security.
Food security. Michelle.
Did someone say like environment?
Did someone say that? Someone did say that, but it could be said again. You can now repeat. I mean, there's a lot, as we said at the beginning, but you know, I think that some of these are big enough that they should be said a couple times, maybe. Haley. You're in the environmental camp. Yeah, you know, like I said, that one might be, if we're going to make it for 70 or 80 years, and we'd want to live longer than that, and maybe you want to have children that make it for even longer, yeah, that would be a big thing, right? What kind of world? Danielle.
It's small compared to the other, but it's a personal product, gas prices.
gas prices. Has to do with economic inequality, has to do with food security, has to do with environmental stuff. Why do we even need to have gas? Right? Why should we be chained to a gas pump? Leah. Maybe I can give you a hint about something new that nobody said yet, but we should all be paying attention to in this country. Anybody listened to some Supreme Court arguments yesterday? Gabe, what should we be paying a little bit of attention to? Reproductive health, reproductive justice, gender, equality, all those things. Annie. Access to education. Absolutely. Huge issue. Has to do with a lot of the other stuff. Okay, what did I say? I think I got most of these. Climate, right? Environmental issues, the issue of what is going to happen to our world. Racial justice. Thank you, Jalen. I tried to frame it in the frame of achieving racial justice instead of drawing attention to racial injustice, but you know, same thing. Social and class equity issues around economic inequality. I'm going to throw into that the gas prices. I probably should have education in a separate, I think these are all issues in which education plays in. I had not thought, Gabe, of food security. That's a good one. It plays into this because this is something in our own country and also between countries and within other countries as well. Issues of gender equality, and I did get health in there. Absolutely. I mean, we're thinking about this more than ever. Here we are, all masked up still. And Sean, your idea of the political climate, how we do governance, what it means to be a democracy, what it means to participate in governance. Are we going to become a series of authoritarian ethno-nationalist countries, or is there going to be any kind of functioning political climate governance around us? And so I think that for all of these issues, it would be good to have somebody who is looking at these from other parts of the world, not just the United States. It would be good to have people who are combining both the biological side, the evolutionary side, the material culture, historical perspective, with the understanding of culture, the understanding of different languages, the different meanings of the ways in which people are going to approach these. It would be good to have that. Will, have we had that? Not in a little bit, not in a while. I taught one a while ago, but badly. So, because we don't have a linguistic anthropologist. There were times that we were trying to have more linguistic stuff, but actually, there's some slightly good news for you on that front, just slightly. So, before we get to that, one of the things this reminded me of was a quote from one of my mentors. I've told you about him before, Michel-Rolph Trouillot, who said that anthropology has long claimed that the fate of no human group can be irrelevant to humankind. And I was thinking about this in terms of anthropology study. What he was talking about is that in many parts of the world, the global economy people, the people who sell things, have written off whole segments of the population. He was specifically talking about places in southern Africa, which seem to be completely written out of the global economy. Couple double negatives there. This isn't quite as eloquent, but rephrasing it, anthropology has long claimed that the fate of all human groups are important to humankind. And we are certainly seeing that in some ways. In the old days, you could write off whole sections of the population because, you could just wall yourself away, go off to space or an island and not have to worry about that. But as we've seen in the last week with the Omicron variant, what happens in other places is going to happen to everybody. It matters to us that we didn't do global health right. And so, this is happening that we have to pay attention. Even if we're only paying attention to ourselves, we have to pay attention to the fate of all human groups. No human groups can be irrelevant to humankind. Which reminded me of a different quote. You may have heard this one before. Injustice anywhere is a threat to justice everywhere. And I think that's important to keep in mind as we see the most probable decision of the Supreme Court to undermine certain rights to reproductive health that people have taken for granted in our country. We see that in terms of the global inequities in health, which are now hurting us all. Injustice anywhere, the racial justice issues around policing, which become a global movement. We are caught in an inescapable network of mutuality, tied in a single garment of destiny. Whatever affects one directly affects all indirectly. Whoa, that is so true now. Anybody recognize this quote? Who said this? Wrote this? Guesses? I should have a reading session on our day off that we take. That's Martin Luther King Jr. Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. The letter from a Birmingham jail, 1963. Anytime you're writing a letter from a jail, you probably should pay attention to it. But yeah, amazing, amazing stuff. Very relevant to us. So, like I said, it would be good to have anthropology doing all these things. Willa has asked if we are doing all these things. I usually don't completely try to plug my own stuff, but next semester, I thought I'd plug a couple things. These are heavy-duty anthropology classes. If you've taken this class and want to take one of these classes, ask me about it. And they involve a lot of reading, though. This class is also known as the History of Anthropological Thought, but it's offered in two different versions. One of them is called Environment, Race, and Sovereignty. We'll be reading Tim Ingold's book, The Perception of the Environment as a Doorway into the History of Anthropological Thought, along with some hunter-gatherer stuff, well, from Canada, that is. Maps and Dreams by Hugh Brody, a couple of classics, but then I wanted to throw in some newer stuff around the idea of sovereignty, governance, these things. A book by Yarimar Bonilla about the French Caribbean called Non-Sovereign Futures. Really interesting islands there, some of which are still technically a part of France. And so some issues around what it means to be a country, what it means to be a sovereignty, and a real linguistic anthropology book, which may kill us all, Looking Like a Language, Sounding Like a Race by Jonathan Rosa, which is a recent stuff. And for those of you who've read in linguistic anthropology, this stuff gets really technical really fast. So it's going to be hard to read, but really, hopefully, I think quite interesting and important. We'll see how it goes. So like I said, this course is known as the History of Anthropological Thought. Willa and Gabe are already in it, but it also can be taken as a different title if you're not an anthropology major but really want to do that. Another course, which is actually the senior seminar in anthropology, where Liz is and one other senior major. I'm also titling it Anthrovision, Work-Life Anthro. So this again is going to be some hard readings. Actually, these readings are probably not as hard as the last one. Close Encounters with Humankind, one of the few paleoanthropology books written by a person, written, let's be frank, by a non-white male, by someone outside of the people who are usually writing these books. So I'm excited about that. One of the most interesting recent books. A book by Mark Schuller called Humanity's Last Stand, Confronting Global Catastrophe. Fortunately, came out just before the coronavirus epidemic, but we'll get some of that in there. A book by Gillian Tett, which gives us the title for the course, Anthrovision, How Anthropology Can Explain Business and Life. And yeah, we'll be working on our resumes and how to get a job and a career and all that good stuff. A book by Tim Ingold called Correspondences, probably his least anthropological book, about writing to trees and stuff like that. A lot of environmental stuff. And finally, a graphic novel by Elise Waterston, Light in Dark Times, The Human Search for Meaning, which is about what anthropology is. So again, these are not for, you have to be hardcore in anthropology to like this stuff, but if you are and you want to take a course, let me know.